In Israel this morning, Shabbat Shalom. We pray for the peace of Israel, which is under attack these days. I'm very happy to be here. I see my dear friend John Morris. Good to see you, brother. So glad you made it. Don Shockey, and I want to thank Alan Serson, who really spearheaded this and got this all started. So we're grateful. I came up from Mexico, where we live, and my wife is in Spain. And Venice. I've always wanted to take my wife to Venice, but this happened, and I had to make a decision. So you see where my priorities are? Spain can wait. Venice can wait. I'm going to take my wife there next year. Is this going to work?
It should.
All expeditions have a lot of uncertainties. But I first became very interested in archaeology and the Middle East when I went there in 1960. I was only 20 in 1960. And really got interested in all of the archaeology of Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and Turkey. And I began studying. I had already been working in art. I started drawing at the age of 4 in prison camp. I was a naughty boy. The Japanese captured us in the Philippines. Right after Pearl Harbor, they hit the Philippines, captured us, and I spent World War II as a guest of the Imperial Japanese Army. Starving, tortured. It was the most terrible, terrible time. And you can talk to the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Filipinos what they went through. And as we were lined up for execution, the Japanese had started killing their prisoners. 130 American paratroopers dropped out of the sky. "130 young, inexperienced American soldiers against 15,000 well-equipped, well-trained, well-experienced Japanese soldiers. MacArthur set them in behind enemy lines. They were told, most of you will die in this mission. But tomorrow morning, thousands of our citizens are going to be executed. How many of you volunteer to go on this mission?" All 130 hands went up of the 911th Infantry, Company B. As we were lined up, 9 C-47s flew over, paratroopers dropped, and do you know what they did? They gathered in a circle and had prayer. That's when America prayed to win. That's when America fought to win. That's when America won.
Amen.
And liberated hundreds of millions of Chinese, Koreans, Filipinos, Vietnamese, Singapore, clear down to Australia. I pray for those days to return. we need to pray for our country because we are definitely on the wrong track. Is this going to work?
It should.
All right. In 1969, I was invited to join the Search Foundation. I had just come back from serving in the war of Vietnam. I was a photographer taking movies of the war in Vietnam. You've seen my work. And I was working in Silicon Valley doing artwork for Lockheed and Hewlett-Packard. You may have heard of them. And the phone rang. They said, we're looking for someone. We need a photographer, a motion picture photographer, to go on an expedition in search of Noah's Ark. Would you be interested? Well, I said, my life has been so boring up to this time. I need a little excitement. So I thought for 2 minutes and said yes. Put in my notice and went to Washington, D.C., and then we were joined by Fernand Navarra, who has written book J'ai trouvé l'Arche de Noé. I have found the Ark of Noah. He had been on several expeditions, seen wood. He said he knew where Noah's Ark was, and so he agreed to take us up. And I was the photographer on that. It was the first scientific movie made of the search for Noah's Ark. And there we dug for 2 weeks in the glacier. We had scientists from the South Pole with coring augers, and we drilled down through the ice. It's a long story, but we found wood, had it dated, and I'll tell you all about that if we can get this thing started. And is this what do I push this thing? I don't know anything about computers. Can you see it all right down here? There's nothing downstairs. How about on the other?
Let's see if I can get it started here. Mark, we need you to come get it started.
After that expedition, we brought wood back down from Mount Ararat off the Parrot Glacier. There was a construction in disarray in the Parrot Glacier.
It's ready. Push the right.
Push.
Hit the right click there.
Push that.
It'll advance it. Yes, you can see what's happening.
Is it? Is it coming? All right. This is my short version. I have a 2-hour program and I have 20 minutes. So I will shorten this way down. Some of the work I've done. Can we enlarge that somehow? Is it large? All right. Let's keep trucking along here. Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey on the border of the Soviet Union, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. A very friendly place. 400 wars have been fought through this region. And there in the middle of all this is Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark, very well protected. Christianity was first in Turkey when Constantine moved the empire from Rome to eastern Turkey, Istanbul. He renamed it Constantinople, and of course it's now called Istanbul. This was a Christian cathedral. You can still see the remains of early Christianity. But Christians have not done very well in the Middle East, and we made a lot of enemies. You can hear about it in the news today. They're fighting us, and they want to kill us. The only thing that can stop this war is the Prince of Peace. And now Muslims pray toward Mecca, and they're good people. I love the Muslims. I've worked with them. I grew up with them in the Philippines and in Singapore and Indonesia, where Barack Hussein Obama went to school and learned to love the Muslim people. And they are good people. But there is a strain of extremism, as there is in Christianity and all religions and political. Extremism is our enemy. Most people are children of God, and we're all related through Noah. As you go to eastern Turkey, time has stood still. This picture could have been photographed at the time of Jesus, couldn't it? Except for the man in trousers there. This is Dogubayazit, the little town where we gather, get our donkeys and horses and food and permits and guards, and everything costs a lot of money. Lots of what we say in Mexico, mordida. Money, money, money. Everything costs in the Middle East. You can't get anything done without paying a bribe. And here's Ishak Pasha Palace. They say that Marco Polo stayed here around 1300. Saw Mount Ararat right out there, and writes about the existence of Noah's Ark in the eternal snows of Mount Ararat. There are ancient Hittite and other ruins. They say that some of these, do you see the walls there? They say those date to the time of King David. And the Hittites, which many people denied for years, but the Bible is full of the history of the Hittites. And there's Mount Ararat, such a beautiful mountain, 17,000 feet. People living as they had for hundreds of years. And now it's a military zone. Turkish tanks on this side, Soviet tanks on the other side, Mount Ararat, Noah's Ark, very well protected in the middle. The Turkish soldiers are really rough fighters. Don't mess with Turkey. I hear, don't mess with Texas. Yes, indeed. I saw these soldiers in Korea during the war there. Very, very fierce fighters. Now, here's a man in white. That's Ron Wyatt. And he wanted me to film and document what he calls Noah's Ark in the middle. I'm the one in black. I had hair then. And Ron Wyatt's in white, so you know who's the good guy and the bad guy there. But this has been disproven from the very earliest times. I could tell you many stories of Ron Wyatt. He was my friend. God rest his soul. I've traveled all over the Middle East, clear to scuba diving in the Red Sea, where we found chariot wheels from the crossing of the Israelites. So he has done a lot of good work, but some things are not. So I don't want to criticize anyone. I say we should support anybody who's willing to risk their life and search and do work in the Middle East. This is the mayor. He's handing me a piece of stone, he says, is from Nuhun Gimisi, from Noah's Ark. I said, I'm sorry, I can't take it. I don't have a permit. I rejected it, but later I saw on television Ron Wyatt had this piece. This is Noah's Ark that I discovered. It's another long story. So we're climbing here. I'm the one on the horse there, Roy Rogers, and we, you know, four days hiking, and we get to a very nice place to camp, to put up our base camp, and I did the first filming. And after a couple weeks of hard work, we found this wood in a crevasse at the edge of the glacier. And we had skeptics, scientific men, especially Dr. Hugo Newberg, a skeptical secularist from the South Pole. But when we found this wood, he cried. We had a little prayer meeting. We later had it tested and everything. I'll tell you about that. I then flew with Fernand Navarra to his home in Paris and in Bordeaux, and he showed me all the wood and all the artifacts that he had had from his several expeditions on Mount Ararat. We spent a lot of time together, but he has found this hand-tooled wood, very much as described later by George Hagopian. Here is George Hagopian, the Armenian who grew up in eastern Turkey at Lake Van. It's a long story. I want to leave some time for John Morris. You know, but, and this is, of course, I had hair then. It was right after our first expedition, and I brought wood. I showed him our movies, slides, everything. George Hagopian said, "Sonny, you're in the wrong place." Whoa. We were famous. We were in all the newspapers. Everybody said, Search Foundation discovered Noah's Ark. He says, "Sonny, you're in the wrong place." And that started a year and a half of hard work with this old crusty Armenian who had a heavy accent, but because I grew up in Korea and Japan and speaking to people who didn't speak good English, you speak carefully and slowly, you articulate every syllable, and you repeat your questions, and you use a simple vocabulary. And it took a year and a half to get the whole story, and I have it all on tape, pages of notes and sketches. And George Hagopian, I think we all agree, those of us who are sincere searchers for Noah's Ark, all agree Hagopian is the most reliable eyewitness. And then another reliable eyewitness. But this is what George Hagopian saw, and as you see up here, all the models of Noah's Ark have come from this painting right here, and they made a movie for Hollywood, and they said this is the most reliable view of what Noah's Ark really looked like. Well, I took my baby boy Jonathan to the movies, and when his daddy's face came on the screen in the theater, as big as a barn, "Jonathan, please stand. I want you to see your family there." That's my boy Jonathan. He was a baby when I started this, and when he saw his daddy's face up there on the screen, he said, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And everybody was looking, "Shut up, kid." Oh, this brat, you know. Well, anyway, later they realized who we were, and they introduced me to the theater, and everybody had a standing ovation. But This 2 years later, George Hagopian went back with his uncle, and it was beginning to be covered. Noah's Ark is covered most of the time. It's unreachable most of the time. But on these two occasions, George Hagopian and his uncle saw Noah's Ark. First time, 1904. 2 years later, 1906. George Hagopian was 74 when I met him in 1970. So he was born in 1896, correct? So he died at 72, 2 years later. I'm now 76. Makes me think seriously. But this is what George Hagopian saw, and the whole thing, you can read all about it, and Ed Davis really expands very beautifully on it, and Don Shockey here has wonderful information. Anyway, I had just painted these pictures and went back to Turkey in our 1985 expedition. Earl Cummings, the astronaut Jim Irwin, and we had just met with the ambassador of the United States there, and he pledged his support for the expedition. We met with all the generals of Turkey. They pledged their support and their protection. So we were going to have a good expedition. We met here with NATO General Ralph Havens, and I showed him the drawings and paintings, and he says, "We've seen that. American flyers have flown right along the north border of Turkey there, right along the Ahura Gorge area of Mount Ararat. We have seen that, we have photographed it, and Russian flyers have also seen it and photographed it." Earl Cummings, bless his heart, he just broke down in tears. When we had this confirmation from this general of Noah's Ark, exactly as Hagopian had told me, I know nothing about ships, I'm an archaeological illustrator. I just draw what they say, all right? And there it is. He said, "This is Noah's Ark, and we have seen it." Earl Cummings broke down. He says, "This is the greatest day in all Ark research." Well, we had a 1970, was it 75? Yes, the probe team went up. You know the story, how they were held up by terrorists, AK-47 machine guns. They burned all their tents and their clothes, their boots, their passports, their money. And they said, "Get out of here, you Americans. Next time, we won't be so nice." And when the probe team came down, they were in a very, very sorry state of affairs. And so the Turkish army and the tanks went right over that into Iran. They captured the terrorists, brought them back, and killed them. Any questions? That's the way the Turks handle terrorism. Finished. Jim Irwin and several here, as we were making our way for the second expedition in that summer, because the first, of course, burned out. Most of our friends had to go back. But we then started out for the second time, had a good expedition, and were again turned back by terrorists and the Soviet authorities. That's another long story. But we came to Farmington, New Mexico, and Don Shockey hosted the Ark-A-Thon and introduced us to Ed Davis. He was supposed to show, he was supposed to come and tell us about his experiences and firsthand witness of Noah's Ark. But he had, what was it, a stroke or a heart attack? Something.
Yeah, he could barely even get up.
He was on his deathbed. Do you remember? We all gathered around there in Farmington and had prayer. We prayed first for unity, for God's leading in this sacred search. And then we prayed for Ed Davis to be healed. The phone rang. This is Ed Davis. I'm feeling so good. Somebody come get me. Somebody went down to Albuquerque, picked him up, brought him in, and when he walked into the room, I said, oh no. Another someone pretending to have seen Noah's Ark. I have been through. I'm the old man of the mountain, the only living witness now who goes back to the beginning. And I have seen so much fraud. Really, the devil is working hard to deceive. And Ed Davis walked in, cowboy hat, great big silver buckle with turquoise jewelry and a thing here, and cowboy boots and jeans. And I'm from Washington, D.C., gray suit, tie, and a briefcase, you know. And here's this guy. Oh, no. Anyway, he started to talk. My hair stood up. That's when I had hair. He sounded like George Hagopian. Have you ever heard of George Hagopian? Who? Never. Have you read anything? Have you met George Hagopian? No way. And he has definitely been to the same place on Mount Ararat and has seen the same thing with a little variation. Noah's Ark, up above there, do you see it completely together? That's the way Georgie saw it. He never saw the complete full end, but to him, Noah's Ark looked all in one piece. But between 1906 and 1943, when Ed Davis was taken up there with his friends, Abbas and so on, there's been a terrible earthquake, and the ark has slid down about 100 feet and broken. And now you can see the second piece, but now you can look inside. George Hagopian climbed on the roof and looked in the windows along the roof. And but he couldn't see anything. It was very dark, but it was hollow. Remember that. It wasn't just a big rock. He shouted inside, and his voice echoed and re-echoed. It scared him, little 10-year-old boy. But here, you can now see in, and you can see the 3 decks. Ed Davis describes it very well. The big cages with huge beams of trunks of trees for huge animals at the bottom deck. Down the middle it's like a mall, like this right here. All right, 3 decks, open down the middle, and down the center of the roof is this raised catwalk kind of construction with windows for light and ventilation all the way down the middle of the roof. But at the bottom deck are these huge cages for, he says, for animals larger than any elephant that we know. Second deck, smaller cages, and little cages with wrought iron bars. While people scoff at us, we knew it, you were crazy. The people before the flood and Noah didn't have iron and iron bars. Just read your Bible. Tubal-Cain was an iron worker before the flood, okay? The people before the flood were much bigger and better than we are. It's not evolution, it's devolution. We are pygmies compared to Noah. And if we can find, well, we can. The cubit is not 18 inches according to our measurement, or the 20.6 inches of the Egyptian cubit. It would be more like 36 cubits of Noah, a much bigger man who lived 900 some years. And so that gives you the size of the cubit. And so you can see here where Ed Davis and his Iranian Muslims saw the ark. This is the way it looks tonight. This is a painting. You see the difference between a drawing. This is more archeological, you know, very black and white with pen and ink. But now this is more of a fine art painting. And you can see what Noah's Ark looks like today, with a stream of water running down. It was very hot, the ice was melted, but there's often a lake there. Many have seen a lake. There's ice, and the ark is mostly covered most of the time. And so here's a painting. Where's that? Okay. Don Shockey he's a great collector. I haven't seen this for 30, 40 years. We produced this to raise $1 million. And there's the painting I did for that. And so here's the invitation that I painted for Bible Land Studios. Noah's Ark, as it has actually been seen. I have all the animals, all the people Noah is inviting. They're scoffing. Scientists were there. Global warming were there. And I could go on. That's right, there are prints available, I understand. I have nothing to do with this, but it's okay. This is done through Bible Land Studios, and you can order these. And this is a 4 by 8 foot published, printed by Hallmark. Have you heard of them? And when we were scanning this at Hallmark, they had cameras 80 megapixels. Man, with huge cameras on tracks running along the roof, and the room was full of computers with all these technicians, you know, color correcting and focusing and everything. It was amazing. Anyway, the president asked me if he could have one of the prints that he printed in his office. So there is a print of Noah's Ark in the president's office. I think that's the end. Oh yes, I went to Hong Kong, and there they have built a full-scale model of Noah's Ark near the airport and near Disneyland, Hong Kong. You take a ferry. It's a 5-star hotel, shopping malls, restaurants, 3 cinemas. $1 million, multi-million dollar production. It's a whole resort. And in the 3 cinemas, this is done by the Chinese. and also supported by the communist government. Hello. And the first is the story of the construction of Noah's Ark, how he made it and why. And Noah was Chinese, as you know, and he spoke Chinese in Hong Kong. Okay? And the second cinema shows the flood, and your seats are rocking, the thunder, and they're spraying water on you. You're getting wet. Animals are screaming, and the children in the cinema are screaming and crying. Wow, it's quite an experience. Then you go to the third cinema, and it talks about the environment and how we should take care of our planet, which is a good story for communists or anybody, and take care of the animals, take care of your family, be a good citizen. You know, all these things, which are international. You know, I don't care who you are. This is good material. But then a minister at the end gives an appeal to accept Jesus Christ. Huh? Hong Kong. Go see it. It's a resort. Boats and everything. See the bridge that goes right to the airport? And here's this huge thing, and they have animals made of cement or styrofoam or something. So realistic. Amazing. There we go. Thank you very much.